Stella Garcia was the matriarch of one of the city's richest and most respected families. He always made a point of maintaining complete control over the life of his only son, William. From a young age, William was trained to follow the strict standards of family tradition, studying at the best schools, staying close to the most influential companies, and of course, marrying someone worthy of carrying the Garcia surname. For Stella, her son was a reflection of her own image, molded with dedication and perfection. Or at least, that's what she thought. The situation got out of control when William announced that he intended to marry Alice, a humble farmer with no status and no important connection. For Stella, this was unacceptable. He felt his world falling apart, seeing his son's decision as an affront, a betrayal of the family's tradition. For her, it was a reckless and inexplicable choice. Firmly, he gave an ultimatum. Either William would end the relationship and return to the social circle he belonged to, or he would lose his entire inheritance without any hesitation. William, however, chose Alice. He chose the simple love of the farmer, someone he was genuinely in love with. Stella was appalled and outraged, cutting all ties with her son. For the first time in his life, his control had failed. She disowned William without looking back, convinced that he would soon return, repentant and defeated. But the months passed and William remained silent. At first, Stella believed that he was just resisting, but as time progressed, she began to worry. Who was this woman who had such influence over him? How could William resist the luxury and comfort that always surrounded him? Determined to intervene, Stella decided to visit the farm. "I'm going to solve this once and for all," she thought, believing that her son would thank her for her intervention. Upon arriving, the driver left her at the entrance of the property. Stella felt a pang of discomfort as she looked at the simple house, surrounded by crops and trees. The smell of wet earth and birdsong filled the air, a stark contrast to the scent and silence of his luxurious mansion. Before getting out of the car, he saw a woman in the distance with tied hair and worn clothes organizing firewood. Beside her, William worked, smiling in a way Stella had rarely seen when he was under her supervision. That disconcerted her. When he got down the stairs from the car, he noticed his son's surprised look and Alice's discreet look. Stella ignored the woman completely, approaching William. "So this is where you decided to live," he said, with a tone full of contempt. He adjusted his expensive coat, trying to ignore the discomfort he felt in the rural environment. Everything was simple, without any trace of luxury or comfort, exactly as she feared. William, Stella's son, who had been raised with all the luxury and comfort, was now next to the woman who, in his mother's view, had ruined her perfect plans. Stella observed everything with critical eyes, trying at all costs to prove to herself that that rural world was not the right place for her son. However, something bothered her deeply, the sparkle in William's eyes. Alice, the simple woman William now called his wife, approached silently with a light and respectful smile. Stella looked her up and down, trying to hide the contempt she felt. That situation seemed like an affront to everything I had built. He wasn't created to live in this end of the world, he thought. When Alice offered to carry her bag to the porch, Stella replied coldly, "Thank you, but there's no need." She preferred to carry the bag alone. Alice, without losing her cool, nodded and gently walked away. William tried to ease the tense atmosphere by approaching his mother for a hug, but Stella remained rigid. He took a step back, studying his son with a critical eye. His clothes were rustic, his hands were dirty with dirt, and his face was surprisingly serene. To Stella, it was almost unrecognizable. How could he, always so careful, feel at ease in that disorder? A wave of indignation took over her, and she decided it was time to begin the confrontation she had rehearsed for so long. "What happened to you?" Stella asked, her voice cold and her eyes fixed on William. "How could you change so much? Everything I gave you." And he pointed to the open field around him, as if showing something despicable. William took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Mom," he replied, "I changed because I wanted a real life. Here, I feel like myself. I can do what really makes me happy." Stella snorted in disbelief. "Make someone happy," he repeated, not hiding his frustration. In his mind, happiness was always associated with the luxury and comfort of the family mansion. For her, what William experienced there was not happiness but a form of self-sabotage. I needed to bring him back, convince him that that simple life was something inferior. But looking at Alice, who was waiting in the distance with her arms crossed and a serene look, Stella felt a small and uncomfortable doubt. The atmosphere there emanated a peace that made the matriarch question, even if for a brief moment, her own certainties. Still, she remained determined. Stella looked at William again, but this time her gaze faltered. Even though she was determined to get the truth out of her son, she began to feel like she might not have the control she always imagined. She crossed her arms, took a deep breath, and without waiting another second, decided to confront him. "So that's it, William. Do you really think that this life," she said, with a dramatic pause as she looked around, as if the simplicity of the farm were an argument in itself, "this life full of privations is enough? Is this how you want to live?" William, with a firm look and a calm posture, remained calm, as if he had already expected this type of confrontation. He took a deep breath and responded with a calmness that irritated his mother even more. "Mom, here I found what I never had by living up to your standards. Here I can be myself. I don't need to pretend or prove anything to anyone." Stella felt her blood boil. How could her son reject everything she had fought so hard for? The prestigious position, the legacy she had built with so much effort. Everything seemed to be wasted on an insignificant farm next to a woman who, in her opinion, had no pedigree, ambition, or any value. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. Do you have any idea what you're doing, William? What are you giving up? Success, luxury, everything a respectable family deserves." Stella practically screamed, but William remained unfazed, just shaking his head in disapproval. Alice, who had been watching the argument from a distance, slowly approached. Without wanting to interrupt, he placed his hand on William's shoulder, offering him silent support. Stella looked away from Alice with obvious disdain. "And you," she said, turning to Alice with a dismissive tone. "Were you the one who convinced him that this life was enough? That he should abandon everything I've built?" Alice held Stella's gaze serenely. "Miss Stella," he replied calmly, "I never asked William for anything. He chose this life willingly because he believed that here he would find the peace he always sought. I just offered what I had, love and a simple life. It was always enough for me." At that moment, Stella remained silent, absorbing every word she had just heard. It was incomprehensible to her that someone could choose love over money, giving up all the comfort and security that wealth provides. The vision of Alice, a humble woman who dared to love without material ambitions, stood before his eyes, displaying unwavering confidence. It was something that Stella, even with all the money she had, could never achieve. Alice turned to her mother, this time with an intense gleam of conviction in her eyes. "You always offered me what you thought was best, but you never asked what I really wanted," Alice began. "I didn't trade luxury for poverty. I traded emptiness for happiness. If you could see that—" Alice's words echoed like a blow to Stella. For the first time he felt that perhaps he didn't know his own son as well as he thought. The next morning, Stella woke up to the sound of roosters crowing. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the air, coming from the modest kitchen of the house where I was staying. Everything seemed so different from his mansion, where the silence was absolute and any untimely sound was an invasion of the environment. Now, Stella found herself immersed in a place that, to her, seemed chaotic, but that everyone there treated with disconcerting naturalness. Going down the stairs, he found William already standing, helping Alice with the morning chores. He seemed like a different person, and Stella didn't know how to process that. He observed in silence the couple's routine, the shared breakfast, the serenity while they took care of farm chores, such as feeding the animals and looking after the crops. To her surprise, William did everything calmly and with a slight smile on his face, an expression she had never seen on him before. At first, Stella just watched from afar, like a suspicious spectator. She was sure that over time, William would get tired of that rural life and return to the comfort it had always offered him. However, seeing his son spend hours under the sun, facing the demands of the earth, without ever showing signs of tiredness or irritation, began to shake his convictions. It seemed that in that simplicity, he had found something deeper, something that she had never been able to provide. Stella also noticed the evident complicity between William and Alice. The two exchanged looks full of affection, working in perfect harmony, as if they were parts of a single organism. She remembered how, in the life she had planned for William, love had always been secondary. What mattered was status, security, and business. It never occurred to him that his son could find satisfaction in a life without these elements, especially with a woman as simple as Alice. It all seemed like an absurd fairy tale, but as much as I was reluctant to admit it, it was real. It was happening right before their eyes. As the days went by, Stella began to feel less uncomfortable in that environment. At night, lying in a modest room, I listened to the couple talking affectionately, their low laughs echoing through the thin walls of the house. It was then that she realized something undeniable. William was happier there than he had ever been at gala events or business meetings where she forced him to be present. The truth crept into Stella's mind like a nagging doubt, something she could no longer ignore. Had she underestimated her son's ability to find happiness far from what she had always considered essential? Stella was not prepared for the scene she witnessed the next morning. After breakfast, while William and Alice were preparing for another day of work, an elderly neighbor appeared at the farm with a distressed expression. Alice immediately dropped what she was doing and ran to meet the woman, listening attentively to every word. The lady explained that her husband was sick and that the crops were not yielding enough to buy food. Without hesitation, Alice entered the house and grabbed bags of food and items that could help her neighbor, handing them over with a warm smile. The woman was moved, thanking her with tears of gratitude shining in her eyes as she shook Alice's hands. Stella watched everything from afar, amazed. That woman, who she had despised so much, gave what little she had without expecting anything in return. When the neighbor said goodbye, Stella couldn't contain her questioning. With an incredulous expression, he approached Alice. "Do you always do this?" he asked, trying to hide the judgment in his voice. "I mean, giving what little you have, even without being forced?" Alice looked at her calmly, without any sign of discomfort. "I do what I can, Miss Stella. I grew up with little, but I learned that when we share, no one goes without what they need. Here on the farm, we live in community. When one suffers, everyone helps. Happiness is not in what we accumulate, but in what we can offer." Stella was taken by surprise. That worldview was completely opposite to what he had taught William. In the Garcia family, everyone lived for themselves, and even acts of charity were done to improve public image, not out of genuine generosity. Now here was Alice, practicing a selfless kindness, a kindness that didn't seek applause, just empathy. Stella looked at William, who was watching silently, as if waiting for his mother to reach her own conclusions. That scene made Stella question for the first time the values she believed in. Alice's love and humility resonated with strength, with actions so simple and powerful that Stella had difficulty understanding, but she couldn't deny the impact. When William returned to work, Alice approached Stella and offered her fresh herbal tea, picked right there on the farm. Surprised by the gesture, Stella accepted the tea and took a sip, feeling the simple and refreshing flavor. A mixture of feelings surged within her, admiration, discomfort, and perhaps even a faint touch of respect. Alice was not like the women Stella knew, those who competed to display wealth and power. She was different. She lived in a reality where people's value was in kindness, not in fortune. Stella didn't say anything, but her expression revealed some astonishment. Alice, however, just smiled slightly, as if she was already used to dealing with looks like that. She knew that Stella didn't see her as William's equal, but she still treated her with patience and kindness. Stella finished her tea in silence, watching Alice return to work. In the evening, after a long day on the farm, William sat next to his mother on the porch. The starry sky stretched above them, and the sounds of nature filled the air. Stella was visibly uncomfortable, as if the silence and darkness were disconcerting reminders of everything she had avoided in her controlled, perfectly lit life. William broke the silence, speaking with unexpected serenity. "Mum, I know you don't understand what brought me here, but I wanted you to know that this life with Alice is what makes me happy." Stella sighed, crossing her arms like a shield, trying to maintain her composure. He spent years molding William to follow in the family's footsteps, believing that, surrounded by wealth and prestige, he would find security and stability. But here he was, saying that the Garcia family's luxury and inheritance were never what he really wanted. "But you always had everything good and the best," she argued, with her gaze fixed on an indefinite point on the horizon. "I did everything so that he didn't lack for anything, so that he had opportunities and a life that many can only dream of. I can't understand why you abandoned all of this." William looked at his mother with a sad but determined expression. It was an inevitable confrontation. "Mum, I know you did everything with the best of intentions, but you never asked me what I really wanted, what would make me happy. The life I had was your vision of happiness, but it was never mine." Stella was surprised. The idea that her son had never found happiness in luxury seemed like a truth she refused to accept. For her, happiness and security were built on power and influence. He remained silent, but he felt an internal hesitation, as if he were finally hearing something that William had kept for a long time. "I always thought money bought everything," Stella murmured, almost to herself. "Even your happiness." "Mum, you never really believed that," William replied calmly. "I suffocated myself trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to live up to expectations that were never mine. I knew that in your eyes, this life here had no value, but next to Alice, working on this land and helping people, I feel something that money could never give me." Stella felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a silent but deep regret. Her pride and belief in the supremacy of money blinded her to what her son really wanted. Listening to him talk about freedom, simplicity and peace, she wondered if, in fact, William's longing was a reflection of something she herself had left behind in her life. Young William gently reached out, resting his hand on his mother's, trying to break the emotional barrier that had always existed between the two. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong, Mum. I just wanted you to understand that this was my choice, and for the first time, I truly feel at peace." Stella remained silent, unable to respond. The darkness and silence of the night seemed to swallow her doubts, as William's words continued to echo in her mind. There, on the porch of a simple house, under the stars of a sky she rarely looked at, Stella found herself in an internal dilemma. For the first time she wondered if her efforts to mold her son into the man she envisioned were a mistake.
Before we continue, I need to tell you something amazing. Do you want to attract a lot of money into your life? Learn how to do it with the secret content that I will leave in the first pinned comment, and start transforming your financial life. Let's continue.
The next day, while William helped one of the farm workers, Alice and Stella were alone in the kitchen. The tension between the two was almost palpable, but Alice, with the patience and serenity that was natural to her, remained calm. Stella, on the other hand, looked uncomfortably at every corner of that simple environment, as if every detail was a reminder of her son's choice that she still considered foolish. It was Alice who broke the silence with a respectful tone. "Mrs. Stella, I understand you're worried about William. I know that in your eyes he made a decision that seems incomprehensible." Stella looked up, surprised by Alice's courage in starting that conversation. She expected a submissive posture, but Alice spoke as an equal, with a certainty that disconcerted her. "Of course it's incomprehensible," Stella replied, without hiding her critical tone. "He had a bright future ahead of him, a career, an inheritance, a life of respect, and he traded all that for this." She made a vague gesture with her hand, referring to the simple surroundings. "Maybe it's a whim, or you manipulated him." Alice took a deep breath, controlling the urge to respond to the provocation harshly. "I knew that wouldn't solve anything." In the same calm tone he replied, "I have never manipulated you, Mrs. Stella. Loving someone means respecting the freedom of their choices." Stella felt disconcerted. No one had ever spoken to her like that, without fear, but also without hostility. Alice continued, talking about what William had faced. The pressure he always felt, how trapped he felt in a life that wasn't his. "I just gave him the opportunity to be who he is, without judging him. And deep down, I think he would still love to have your approval. He respects you, Mrs. Stella, and that's why, even after everything, he still hopes you can understand each other." Stella remained silent, absorbing those words. He felt a growing discomfort as he realized that, perhaps, Alice was right. What surprised her even more was the absence of any trace of resentment or rancor in Alice's voice. That woman really seemed to want the best for William without caring about the price, and this purity was something that Stella did not expect. For the first time, she allowed herself to question her own pride. Alice watched her for a few seconds as if she could feel Stella's inner turmoil, and then continued sweetly, "I know it's not easy to accept, but resentment will never bring anyone happiness, Mrs. Stella. Maybe, if you talk to him without judging him, just listening to what he has to say, that can reduce the distance between you." Stella froze, as if Alice's soft voice had broken an invisible barrier within her. She had never imagined that this simple woman, who she used to consider so inferior, could offer such profound advice. Stella's pride prevented her from responding, but something in her heart began to change. Shortly after that conversation, an unexpected incident brought a new layer of complexity to Stella's visit. The next morning, while William and Alice were in the field picking fruit, Stella began to feel a sharp pain in her chest. The discomfort seemed harmless at first, but it soon intensified, causing her to lose her balance. She tried to hold onto the kitchen wall, but her strength gave way and she fell heavily to the floor. It was Alice who found her. Entering the kitchen, he saw Stella lying down and ran to her. Concerned, Alice carefully helped her to get up and sit on a chair. Stella, still pale and dazed, struggled to catch her breath while Alice, quickly and attentively, took a glass of water and a damp cloth, placing them gently on her mother-in-law's forehead. "Miss Stella, are you okay?" Alice asked, her voice calm and full of concern. Stella, still a little dizzy, gestured yes, but the discomfort on her face was evident. "I've never been through something like this before." She had always been unshakable, used to having control over everything and everyone, but at that moment she felt vulnerable. And what surprised her most was the person who was by her side, taking care of her without hesitation. Alice, someone she had so often despised. "I'm fine, don't worry," Stella murmured, trying to compose herself and hide her fragility. "I just need a moment." But Alice paid no attention to the comment and insisted on staying there, taking care of her with unexpected zeal, asking about her diet and her rhythm of life. Alice's concern was genuine, and Stella didn't know how to deal with the care she wasn't used to. Alice remained by her side, offering words of comfort, even when Stella, still reluctant, seemed unwilling to admit that she needed help. "You should get some rest," Alice suggested. "I'm going to make some herbal tea. It'll help ease the tension." Stella made a gesture of rejection, still trying to maintain a facade of strength, but Alice was already on her feet, determined, going to prepare tea. Sitting there, more vulnerable. Stella watched Alice with a mixture of surprise and bewilderment. Never before had I felt what it was like to be cared for with so much affection, without expecting anything in return. Throughout his life, people around him did this out of interest or convenience. But here was Alice, the same woman I had once despised and accused of being a bad influence, ready to help without asking anything in return, just out of kindness. The news of what had happened quickly reached William. Upon returning home, he ran to his mother, his heart tight with worry. He approached carefully, touching Stella's shoulder with a light caress, while his eyes reflected the anxiety he felt. "Mum, do you want me to take you to the doctor?" he asked, trying to hide the fear in his voice. Stella took a deep breath, trying hard to maintain her composure. "It was just a temporary inconvenience," he said, trying to appear calm. However, upon seeing William's worried expression, something inside her broke. He felt almost unexpectedly a wave of shame mixed with relief. Without realizing it, he began to realize that Alice was there out of genuine concern. Maybe life wasn't just about status or money. Perhaps the true value was in the presence of people who reached out in difficult times. That simple kindness, which I had once considered a weakness, now felt like a strength I had never understood. Stella accepted the tea that Alice offered, and in a barely audible voice murmured, "Thank you." Alice smiled, as if she understood that that small gesture meant more than words could express. While William and Alice were busy making sure Stella was comfortable, she experienced something she had never felt before, being cared for without commitment, without interest, just with pure and sincere affection. That day, something began to change inside her. It was a confusing transformation, but at the same time intriguing. Stella couldn't help but think about everything she experienced and felt. The next day, as he reflected on everything that had happened, he realized that the impact of that simple gesture was deeper than he imagined. Stella decided it was time to do something to give back, even with all the differences that still existed between them. The farm's environment of solidarity and simplicity began to touch something in her heart, motivating her to act. Determined, she looked for Alice and invited her for a talk. "Alice, I know we had our differences," Stella began, her voice firm but her gaze a little hesitant. "I would like to offer some financial assistance." In his hands he held a check for a generous amount. "You can use it to improve the farm or anything you need. I think it's time for me to contribute." Alice was surprised. He looked at the check and then at Stella before giving a gentle smile. With a calm gesture, he shook his head and returned the check. "Mrs. Stella, I really appreciate it, but we don't need this," he replied calmly. "Here on the farm, we have enough to live well and even help our neighbors when necessary. The happiness we find together does not depend on what we have in the bank." Stella was amazed. I couldn't understand how anyone could reject such a large sum, especially in a world where money seemed to make everything easier. This reality was something I had never been able to accept. "Alice, I understand what you're saying, but think about how much simpler life could be with that money," she insisted, still confused by the refusal. Alice smiled again with an understanding look. "Mrs. Stella, of course this money could make everything more comfortable," he explained. "But we would lose the value of the little things. Every little piece of the farm is the result of our effort and love. Simplicity, working together, is what makes us happy. And that's enough for us." Stella didn't know what to answer. For the first time, he saw a strength in Alice that went beyond appearances and social conventions. Speechless, he held the check, feeling an unexpected wave of respect for his daughter-in-law, who had rejected his help, not out of pride, but out of a principle she herself had never understood. True happiness cannot be bought. As the days went by, Stella began to familiarize herself with the farm's routine and the people of the small rural community. What once seemed insignificant was revealing itself as a world full of surprises. The solidarity and genuine friendship were palpable. It was common for neighbors to show up to ask for help or offer something, like baskets of fruit plant seedlings or a simple conversation at sunset. On one of those days, a neighbor arrived bringing homemade cakes. Alice thanked her happily, and William approached Stella, starting a conversation about life in the countryside. At first, Stella was reticent, but was soon captivated by the woman's simplicity and joy, feeling in some way welcomed. The farm vibrated with a spirit she had never experienced in the world of wealth and ostentation in which she lived. Observing Alice and William, Stella noticed how they actively participated in the life around them, not just with words but with actions. The couple helped organize farmers' markets, offered support to those in need, and never hesitated to roll up their sleeves to help a neighbor harvest. They really cared about each other. "It's like a big family," Stella murmured thoughtfully, addressing no one in particular. William, who was next to him, smiled and confirmed with a gesture. "Here, everyone looks out for each other. It's this feeling of belonging that makes us feel complete, Mum." Stella finally understood. Unlike the world I knew, where appearances and masks were common, these people lived without the constant pressure to prove something. William decided that he would remain there, involved in that community where each person was valued in their own unique way. This sense of belonging began to awaken a strange feeling in Stella, a longing for something she had never experienced, a truly disinterested bond. She came to see William's happiness as something authentic and deeply human. On a quiet afternoon, Stella and Alice were alone on the balcony. William had left to resolve some issues in the city, and the silence between the two was tense but not uncomfortable. It was as if they both knew something had changed. Stella, who had always avoided any more intimate conversations with Alice, realized that this was the opportunity to try to better understand the woman who had transformed her son's life. After a few moments of hesitation, Stella sighed, breaking the silence. "Alice, you really love William, don't you?" The question came out in a trembling voice, without the superior tone he usually used. Alice smiled, surprised by her mother-in-law's vulnerability, and responded calmly. "Miss Stella, I love William more than anything. He brought a joy that I never imagined possible, and I do everything to make him feel that happiness with me." Stella swallowed, looking at her hands, trying to understand the sincerity in those words. Finally, she dared to ask the question that had been tormenting her since the beginning. What if you could give him the luxury and comfort you always wanted for him? Wouldn't it feel like something was missing? Alice took a deep breath before answering, choosing each word carefully. "Miss Stella, true comfort is not in material goods. It was here that we found peace, away from the pressures that previously suffocated him. I know this may not seem like much to you, but for us it is enough. My biggest ambition is for him to feel loved and complete. For me, this is the greatest achievement." Stella was silent, feeling the weight of Alice's words, that shattered all the certainties she had about what it meant to be happy. Contrary to what he'd always believed, perhaps love and simplicity were more valuable than status or money. She had never prioritized it. Not even the look of her own son had made her question her beliefs before, but now, faced with Alice's calm strength, she felt disarmed. Without realizing it, he murmured, "Maybe I judged you unfairly." Alice smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding, and without saying a word, she made it clear that she didn't hold any grudges. The silence between them was more than enough to convey a sincere message. It was the beginning of a new understanding between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, an understanding that seemed to finally bring the peace they so desperately needed. During that silent conversation, Stella began to notice something that she hadn't noticed before. Alice had something special, something that she had never known how to see. That night, after the conversation with Alice, Stella had the opportunity to see her son in a different way. Observing from afar, he saw William and Alice in the kitchen, side by side, preparing dinner. Something about the scene touched her deeply. They were so connected, exchanging smiles and small gestures of affection as they cooked together. It was a simple harmony, but filled with something that seemed rare, even unusual. She noticed the sparkle in William's eyes, something she had never seen, not even on the most sophisticated occasions when they were together. He looked complete, like he was finally at peace with himself. And Alice, with her delicate, silent and affectionate gestures, seemed to be the reason for this serenity. Stella realized that it was not necessary to have expensive jewelry or luxurious clothes to be happy. What they had between them was genuine, a pure love based on respect and mutual admiration, something money could never buy. Watching this scene, witnessing the love between them, was like a silent lesson for Stella. He felt a pang of regret as he remembered his own life, where he prioritized status and prestige above all else. She now saw that despite all his wealth, her son had never had what seemed to be the most important thing, a true, sincere love, a love that is not based on possessions but on feelings. And at that moment, a mixture of sadness and pride took over her. William did not need an inheritance or a high position in society. He found happiness without needing any of that. Stella began to understand that William's greatest treasure was the love he had, something she had never known how to offer. At first, Alice seemed to be a rival, a threat to the life Stella imagined for her son. But now she saw her differently. Alice was the key to William's happiness, a simple but genuine happiness. She gave him what Stella had never known how to give, the freedom to be happy, to live according to her heart. After weeks spent on the farm, Stella realized that the simple and true life that William and Alice had created there, along with the generosity of the community, challenged everything she believed in. She found herself torn. As she thought about returning to her mansion and her old life, a feeling of conflict came over her for the first time in many years. She felt proud, but also touched by the change she saw in her own heart. One quiet afternoon, William sat next to her and spoke with a sincerity that made her think deeply. "Mum, I don't want you to give up who you are. I just want you to know that for me, what I found here is true and complete. And if I ever want it, it will always have a place by our side." Stella looked away thoughtfully. Throughout his life, what he valued most was the status and achievements he fought so hard to achieve. Each step taken seemed to justify the effort for recognition and respect. But in that moment, seeing the genuine joy in William's eyes, everything changed. For the first time, the idea of happiness took on a new meaning, something I had never considered before. That night, after hours of reflection, Stella asked to talk to Alice and William. They gathered in the room, lit by a soft lamp, which gave the room a feeling of tranquility. With a serene yet emotional tone, Stella began, "To be honest, I always believed that money and status were what brought me happiness and respect. But seeing you together, I understood that love and peace might be what really matters." Alice smiled, encouraging her to continue, while William paid attention to every word. Stella, her voice a little shaky but determined, continued, "I have decided that I will honor your choices. I will no longer impose my ambitions on you, William. For the first time I see that you have found something more valuable than anything I have ever sought." William's eyes filled with emotion, and he couldn't contain a sincere smile. He hugged his mother gratefully. "Thank you, Mom. This means a lot to me." Feeling the warmth of her son's embrace, Stella realized that this act of acceptance was the most significant gesture of love she had ever made. In the days that followed, Stella experienced a different peace. Although he knew that his life still had commitments and appearances to maintain, he said goodbye to the farm with a new perspective on what really mattered. When she left, Alice and William accompanied her to the car. In a spontaneous gesture, Stella hugged Alice with sincerity and emotion. She surprised everyone, including herself. "Thank you, Alice," she said, looking into her daughter-in-law's eyes. "You taught me more about life in these weeks than years of living with high society people. Take good care of my son." Alice, moved, replied, "You can leave it, Miss Stella. He is in good hands." William also hugged her, and this time Stella reciprocated with genuine affection, without the usual coldness. He said goodbye with a look that overflowed with respect and gratitude. On the way back to the city, Stella was silent, sitting in the back seat, watching the rural scenery. She felt refreshed, lighter. It was not just a change of environment, but a profound transformation of the soul. Upon returning, he realized that the old routine no longer made sense. He began to simplify his life, valuing authentic moments and connections. The heritage that previously represented control over the child gained a new meaning. Stella decided that when the time came, this inheritance would be used to support William, Alice, and even community projects that made a difference, something I had never imagined before. Completing her personal journey, Stella has finally freed herself from the shackles of pride and ambition. Now, he understood that his true inheritance was the lesson of love and respect he learned from his son and daughter-in-law. That was worth more than any fortune. If you liked this story of transformation and love, leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and activate the notification bell to receive more inspiring stories that touch the heart and make us reflect on what really matters in life. Don't miss the next video and share it with someone special to follow this journey with us.